Dad and Rece, do y'all remember that clip that James just played?
Do either one of y'all know the coach that signed Wilbur Jackson?
I do. Patrick.
I knew you would. You know it all. You're the best I've ever seen. It was Pat Dye.
Really?
Yep.
Good morning, Rece. How you doing?
Good morning. How are you guys?
We're doing
good.
Great.
Hey,
Thank
Rece, Mac Jones, the third-string quarterback here, is a lot smarter than you and I. They got an article today that he is the head coach of a sorority football team here in flag football. They got him out there coaching, and all the girls are drooling over him. Were you ever that smart to be the head coach of a girls' intramural flag football sorority team here?
Well, first of all, yes, I was smart enough to do so, but the problem is that none of the sorority girls would have anything to do. But Mac has been able to succeed where I failed miserably.
Go ahead, Dad.
Well, you hadn't failed in what you've been doing because you've absolutely been very, very good. You've been terrific and continue to be good on all athletics. Really, it's amazing to me. When I coached, I took some shots, and then I got a bunch of shots from people that didn't like what I did. But yeah, so I'm kind of like Johnny Miller. I took some shots, and I got some shots. Let me ask you this: Notre Dame's okay. Texas or Oklahoma out of the Big Pac-12, Big 12. Ohio State, Clemson doesn't play anybody. We'll see if they play, how they do with NC State. Are we sitting here with an Alabama, Georgia, maybe an LSU, so far ahead of these guys that, and I don't, you probably have to be careful answering it, so far ahead of these guys that we got a mediocre, maybe football is a little bit watered down?
I wouldn't say that because I don't know that I think they're so far ahead. I tend to put, at the moment, and I put Alabama and Ohio State a notch above everybody else. Now, Ohio State, defensively, anyway, hasn't consistently performed to the level of their talent. But I think that if you look at the rosters in terms of athleticism and depth and explosiveness and big, strong, fast guys, Ohio State can match up with Alabama. I think Clemson largely can match up with Alabama. So, and Georgia can, I think. So anyway, I don't think they're so far ahead. Any team can lose a game. As you know, as our friend Bob Knight likes to say, dumb loses more than smart wins. So, teams can lose. But I do think those four teams I mentioned, and I guess Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia, I feel like are a little bit a cut above everybody else in terms of being complete. And certainly teams like LSU, and I think Michigan. Michigan's defense is legit against anybody. Their offense is still kind of coming around, but their defense is legit. So those are the teams I kind of put a little bit ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, it's good.
Rece, of course, we're in SEC country. Dad tells me there's no way, he told me this last year, that two SEC teams can make it. I still think there is. If Georgia and Alabama were to make it to Atlanta and Georgia knock off Alabama, now there'd have to be a little bit of help. Can you see any scenario to where Georgia and Alabama could get back in the playoff again this year?
I don't find it likely, but then again, last year I remember doing an interview at Auburn just the day before the Alabama-Auburn game, and people were asking that question, and I said I didn't see it happening. And I think it took a specific set of circumstances to have it happen last year, and there's no way to know exactly what the committee's tolerance level is for a rematch. And the one thing they had going for them last year is that Alabama and Georgia hadn't played. This year, that won't be the case, whether it would be LSU and Georgia as the two, like say LSU. I guess that's a bad scenario because that would be LSU's second loss. If they lost to Alabama, they would play again in the championship game. So either way, any way you slice it, it would be two teams who have already played. So, I wonder if that would give them pause, but then the same thing could probably be said if Notre Dame's in the mix and Michigan were to win the Big Ten, then you would be looking at a potential rematch as well. So I'm not sure what their tolerance level for it is, but I do think it took a very specific set of circumstances for it to happen last year. I really believe had Ohio State either not lost to Iowa as badly as it did or had beaten Wisconsin. Remember the year that Ohio State got in, and the primary reason they got in that pushed them past TCU and Baylor was they beat Wisconsin like 59-0 or something in the Big Ten championship game.
Right.
Had Ohio State done that last year, I think there's probably a reasonable chance that they would have made the playoff instead of Alabama last year. So it took a real particular set of circumstances for it to happen. I would, after seeing it happen, I would never say never, but I agree with your dad. I think it's really unlikely this year.
Yep, Dad.
In Texas A&M, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia, we have 4 football teams, in my opinion, which doesn't mean much, that are always going to stay ahead of the curve and stay ahead of the others. And because all 4 coaches, although South Carolina may have a little bit more difficult time, all 4 coaches work for Coach Saban. And when they hire somebody, they ask you if you like to recruit. They already know you can coach when they call you, but you got to like to recruit and do a good job. I think those 4 schools with those 4 coaches who have learned under him, to me, and this is not you, this is me, are a step ahead of everybody.
Well, it's really, really important. You know, it's kind of funny you mentioned recruiting. When I was down in College Station, we had game day there, and then I called the Clemson Texas A&M game and spending a little time with Jimbo. And one of the things that Jimbo talked about is, I guess there is a plan for Delta to do a direct flight from Atlanta to College Station, and he was talking about how that could open up recruiting opportunities to the east. Texas A&M is always sort of, obviously in Texas and Louisiana, and then looked west. And this is an opportunity perhaps to open up things to the east for them. Now, who knows how long an airline flight will last, but I only relay that story because Jimbo's a perfect example of what you're talking about. While he's a tremendous coach, he's always thinking about recruiting and how important it is. And that's, that's been huge in what Nick's been able to do at Alabama and what Kirby's doing at Georgia. And I think what you'll see the other programs that you mentioned attempt to do. But, all of those, now it becomes even more difficult because the pool certainly is deep in the South, but it's pretty competitive in those waters right now, too.
That sounds like something Nick Saban would do. Get the direct flight from Atlanta.
No, I'm not saying he ordered.
No, I know you're not saying that, but but Rece, that's huge. If that happens, that's huge.
All of that money at Texas A&M. Who knows? Maybe that was part of the contract offer. I don't know. Hey, if you're coming from Florida State, we'll see if we can get a direct flight from Atlanta to College Station.
Maybe Coach Saban needs to call Delta and get that changed, not let that happen. And Kirby.
Both of them, they've worked together on it. That'd be the one thing they'd work together on.
Yeah, they could patch things up. Rece, you're around a lot of great football guys up there. I would love to be in the room when you guys are talking about Tua. When we see him, we're like, he's playing against nobody. He can't do this again. Then he goes out and he does it again. Just what is you guys' impressions been of this guy? Obviously, he's exceeded everybody's expectations. I'd go as far as to tell Dad he gets mad at me. This guy might be the best college quarterback I've ever seen. What do you guys, when you guys talk about Tua up there, what are you guys saying behind closed doors about this guy?
A lot of accolades, just like you're talking about. I think the one thing that stands out about him is his vision and his anticipation. I'm not always the biggest believer in this whole thing. Well, you can't coach that, but I do believe that athletes sometimes have just things that they have learned to do at a young age and don't even realize how they learned to do it or something. And that's where I see him in terms of he recognizes something's open before it's actually open. Some guys have to see an open receiver. Some guys can throw a guy open with their arm. Other guys see it before it happens, and Tua seems to have all of those things. He's a remarkable talent. I'm going to reserve some judgment about whether he's one of the greats of all time. Certainly, also one of the great starts of all time. But I'll say this: the first football season I remember growing up in Alabama is 1971. So I'm intimately familiar with everybody who's played quarterback at Alabama since then. And there have been some really good ones, really good ones. And based on what I've seen so far, he's the best. You know, I heard what Coach Dye said a week or two ago about he's better than Namath and Stabler. I didn't see them play in college, but, you know, there have been, and I don't mean that to, you know, throw rocks at great quarterbacks like, you know, Walter Lewis and Richard Todd and Jay Barker and AJ and, you know, all of that, and Greg, you know, all the guys who had so much success, but or even Jalen. But I think Tua is the best I've ever seen at Alabama. You know, we're only a half season and a championship game into it, but he's been pretty remarkable.
Yep, Dad.
Well, Barry gets upset when I say all it's been is pass and catch, because the defensive backs at all the schools they play are not very good. I just kid him about pass and catch, but it just galls him when I say that.
Can you believe he tries to make me mad, Rece? Can you believe that?
No, I've never known him to use that as a coaching mechanism. I know many of his players would be surprised to find out that he would try to rile you up.
Yeah,
I heard stories about coach listening at the door to see if they were riled up enough for a game. Closed door, they don't know he's out there. He's sneaking up like in an old movie and putting a glass to the door so he can listen through to see if they're irritated enough to win a big game. So he knows all about that, pushing those motivational, emotional buttons.
Well, I have been accused of some way or another, my kids getting a letter from Auburn about how bad we were, and I've been accused of sending those letters, but I deny it.
Notice he didn't say he didn't do it. He just said he denies it.
I did. They did. Some of the smart ones who thought they were smart, Farmer and Godfrey, they weren't sure what they thought. They weren't sure whether it would happen or not. We'd be amiss if we didn't talk a minute about Tennessee before we let you go. My history of Tennessee has been, you know, watching them, and naturally Bill Battle loses his job because of that, because of not being able to beat Alabama, and Bob Nalen wore Coach Bryant out at Kentucky, so he went to A&M. It's been a peculiar rivalry where you go 10 in a row where you win them and 9 in a row when you lose them. It's been a very interesting rivalry. Comment on that for us, Rece.
I think it is strange because throughout history it's been like that, at least through my lifetime. You know, you don't have many back and forth things sort of like you've seen recently. I mean, it's been, you know, significantly more Alabama than Auburn in recent years, but Auburn's had some massive, you know, monumental wins against Alabama, and the Tennessee-Alabama rivalry hasn't really been that way. And it's for it to still be able to maintain some of the intensity is probably a testament to the history. Although I do know, I don't know that that players at Alabama, who I know really take a business-like approach to a lot of these, but reading some of the quotes from this week, you know, I mean, they're used to winning this game, so to them, it doesn't resonate perhaps the way it does with someone from our generation, you know, who remembers the great moments in the rivalry, and Peyton leading the band and Tennessee carrying the goalpost, you know, down and throwing it in the river or whatever they did when they broke the long losing streak, which they're apt to, should they win Saturday. I don't know if there'll be a stone left upon another one in Knoxville if they were to upset them Saturday and end the losing streak. So it's been a unique rivalry, but one that's full of tradition. It's been full of largely, I think, with the exception of the, nastiness in the late 90s, it's been full mostly of mutual respect. So it's one of the great ones, traditional ones in college football, and it's one that I always try to take a little opportunity on game day to remind and educate people who might just think, oh, that's Tennessee, they don't win. Why is that a rivalry game? So, I mean, the story I always like to tell is there was a guy named Bully Vandergraff who tried to pull off his own ear because they were trying to take him out of the game because he wanted to go back in and play against Tennessee. So, General Neyland said you didn't know what a man was made of until you saw how he played against Alabama. So, there's some pretty rich history there between the two that that I think that if Jeremy Pruitt can build on what they did last week in the future, then maybe we'll get a return to the glory days of this rivalry.
What in the world will Phil Fulmer do in the locker room if they beat Alabama, Rece? After what he did at Auburn? What would he do Saturday in there? Good grief.
Well, if that were to happen and it gets out on Twitter again, I hope the good folks at Twitter mark it with one of those not safe for work. So.
I love what the Alabama players said. They said Butch Jones has never gotten to smoke a cigar, so hopefully they're going to get him to where he can smoke one this weekend. Rece, where are you guys going to be this weekend?
Oh, it's going to be a great one, Barry. We're going to be in Pullman, Washington for the first time.
Wow.
This is the 217th consecutive show that a group of Washington State alums, totally on their own, have brought Old Crimson, the Washington State flag, to the show. So on show number 217, almost 15 years to the day after they started doing this as a campaign to get game day to the Palouse, we'll be there. We'll be there to do the show from there. So they play Oregon. They're giving us astronomical expectations in terms of number of people. They're talking, 25, 30,000 people, maybe more, that'll show up 6 a.m. Local time out there. So it's going to be a wild scene out there, and we're really looking forward to it.
Well, slip your cigar in your bag and take it with you, Rece, so you can smoke it if Alabama were to knock off the Tennessee Volunteers. Rece,
thanks, Rece.
Great stuff. We appreciate
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.